Thank you, Edvard, and thanks for the invitation to come and talk to you this afternoon. Excuse me, and it's about innovation clusters in creative industries, and so it's a topic that's caught the imagination of many governments, and it fits with trends in society and people moving towards increasing individualism. It attracts young people who need to find employment, and they only have their imagination as an asset, really, and it tends to require less personal capital investment in other technology sectors. And the technology platforms needed to enable this sector are already in existence and accessible to many. My approach is to discuss this by commenting on where clusters tend to be forming, predominantly in cities, and then discuss some of the aspects of innovation that I think are relevant to the topic. And then some ideas on how the ideas that are being developed to support these clusters. So the current experience is that the majority of these clusters are growing in cities, and it makes them interesting to city authorities because you probably all know that more than 50% of the world's population live in cities. And 180,000 people are moving into cities each day. So it's a very significant issue, and it poses problems for building the infrastructure, but also it poses a problem for creating city-based employment. So one of the questions is, how can the creative industries add to this mix? It's worth starting to answer that question by taking a quick look at cities' work. And a simplified view, very simplified view from economic geography, and probably preaching to the converted here, is that there's a high density of population, which from a statistical point of view, which we were discussing in a previous session, increases the chances of finding the entrepreneurs that are necessary to drive this economy. This in theory makes it possible also not only to spread the cost of the infrastructure, so beyond housing, sanitation and transport, it also means that it gives easy access to the necessary infrastructure to support the creative economy, which is basically broadband services, and it can empower a great number of people. So the efficiency spills over into economic activity by increasing the chance of matching buyers to suppliers and linking entrepreneurs to finance. So there's a much higher transaction rate, so they have the potential to create a cluster. Turning now to clusters, the challenge for many city authorities is how to build on these advantages to help the creative classes make money out of ideas. It seems that the class of people tend to be attracted together because, like other sectors, there's a need to share ideas. People in the creative industries like to collaborate, discuss and evolve ideas. And these people tend to be young, so they're looking for locations which have an excitement about them that makes their social life interesting, and because again they're young, they're looking for low-cost areas for business and for accommodation. The technology base that has been enabled the information revolution also creates an opportunity for the creative classes as they join the innovation loop and create transactions for themselves. And in many ways, the creative classes have already been innovative by introducing such practices as hot desking, very common in advertising practices, crowdsourcing. Some of our games companies on our own research park have used crowdsourcing and crowdfunding to develop their technology, their particular games. And in some instances, they are working in virtual networks. To move along the chain of events, the first step is the need for technology or knowledge exchange. The idea needs to be shared with an entrepreneur who has the skills that are necessary to drive the technology up the value chain. But despite all of the opportunities, the process does not occur with sufficient frequency. So it's clearly complex. So it's also clear to me that it can't be left to market forces alone to drive this exchange. I think the example of the major economies around the world shows it needs active intervention, if for no other reason, to keep up the pace of innovation. This intervention has to happen at several levels. The first is the need to build technological capability. If we examine the platforms that enable the creative industry, we can see the importance of this intervention. Every one of the technologies listed on the screen has been used in the iPod, iPad and iPhone range. And all of these technologies came from research funded by the state. And the same argument applies to the internet. It's a collaboration between US government, DARPA, and the British Post Office. So there is a fundamental requirement to have a technology component to this. If we turn next to the infrastructure that supports innovation, in the same way as in other sectors, it's driven by business, not government. So building on the foundation, innovation, building on this foundation of the role of business, building on the technological capability created by government, innovation is not linear, but comes from distributed or community-based models with a number of stakeholders collaborating. It relies on networks, where these are drawing on a range of external resources. Most innovative change is evolutionary, which involves incremental adaptations of existing elements and products and technologies, and involves new combinations of existing elements, bodies of knowledge or technology. In fact, as we heard from Professor Richard actually this morning, most large companies are risk averse, so they don't try to drive radical innovation because the impact of the results are unknowable and they want to protect their existing investment. This means there's an important role for micro and small and medium-sized enterprises in driving the process. And to have a supply of these companies, there needs to be a culture of innovation across the whole economy. So programs should not just focus on technology. To capture this innovation, businesses need to build advanced organizational practices to manage the process, the innovation process effectively. Some innovative large companies now have two separate groups to do this. One explores creative, radical new ideas, and the other gets on with exploiting and developing incremental improvements in existing ideas. And of course, the amount of effort invested in innovation by any company is also affected by the stage in the life cycle of their products and service range. So there's a few different influences on the process. In terms of building the creative economy, innovation, the creative economy innovation clusters, we need to ask the question, is innovation a sticky activity in which geography matters? Despite the information revolution, which distributes the power to many people, innovation investments and outputs are still concentrated in global centres. This means that if there is to be an acceleration in creating clusters, policy has to work on planting the seed and to build the sticky environment. And one part of the glue is, as I've mentioned, technological competence, but it also needs a physical and cultural element that helps to create the linkages. Also, When these environments become evident, how can they be managed so that the skills based on the environment can add efficiency to the cluster? It seems that in the case of the creative industry, one of the core skills is imagination. The information revolution has made it possible for a much larger number of people to have the opportunity to use their imagination to create ideas that exploit their economic value. And it seems that in the context of wealth creation, it's important to try and establish clusters in locations that are a crossroads where there's arts, culture, business, and technology, and they meet. A good linkage is to connect technology-focused institutes with industrial design, graphic artists, and even give advice to them on how the market works for their technology so that they can promote their technology into that market. So building a relationship between a technical university and a college of art is an important step. So what defines this part of the economy? The UK British Council was the first organisation, or so they say, to put some boundaries to this. They concluded that it comprises industries that are based on individual creativity, skill and talent, with the potential to create wealth and jobs through developing intellectual property. And they suggested it covered 13 sectors. You can see these range from advertising, through architecture, art and antiques market, includes crafts, design and fashion. It takes in moving images, as well as music, performing arts, covers publishing, which includes paper and electronic publishing, and it covers software, television and radio. And because it was the first definition offered by a government, this original UK definition seems to have been widely adopted by other countries, albeit with the same sector being adapted based on local commercial and cultural importance. A United Nations report in 2008 further refined the sector and categorised it into 4 groups: heritage, art, media and functional creations. But it also raised the important question about whether science and R&D are components of this industry. And our keynote speaker, Richard Daejeon, this morning answered that by extending the definition to encompass that part of the spectrum of activity. But I'm going to confine my comments to the more traditional view. Some key features of the now broad-based creative industries are it has many small, micro and medium-sized companies. And it's helped by the ease of access and relatively low capital costs of entry. In reality, it's the idea that seems to count. And much of the route to market for micro, small and medium-sized enterprises already exists through large companies in the media business. There is a significant publicly funded community of broadcasters, which in the UK includes the BBC, Channel 4, there's also theatre companies, museums and galleries, and all these help the flow of money into the sector. Its players, many of whom are freelancers, are often able to react with agility to new opportunities. But on the other side of these benefits, with the exception of a few smaller companies, they don't frequently expand internationally, so they're relatively small and don't have the impact. And it makes it important to try to create international networks to encourage the process of clusters and help them to grow and flourish. It's true that many businesses find it hard to keep up with the changing technologies and economic conditions. So it seems there's a big opportunity for continuous professional development of those in these clusters that are trying to be established and built. So where in this industry do most companies work, and which are of interest to governments? in terms of support. In economic terms, the sector divides into three components: content, service, and artifacts. And the distribution here shows that some are highly dependent on technological aided component to give the digital outputs. And the conclusion of the UK government, based on this analysis of the sector, they've decided that their own intervention should be based on content, and particularly in the end that is most dependent on technology. The UK government has given responsibility for policy associated with innovation to the Technology Strategy Board. There's a national board. Today, and we call it the TSB. Today the TSB offers 18 programs that create functional linkages between knowledge generation and business and entrepreneurial companies. And each has different strengths and advantages and supports different parts of the innovation movement. The two of these are the most, you can see I'm not a professional speaker. The two of these which are most focused on the creative industries are Launchpad and a knowledge transfer network for the creative industries. So that has been established by the government. The Launchpad program has been used to help build interest in creative industry clusters. As examples, two creative economic clusters that the program has supported are Glasgow, near the world-famous Glasgow Arts College. So there's been an investment in 11 companies that have spun out of that area of Glasgow by the government to support their growth. And there's significant investment in the East End of London. Some context for this is that on the international scene, our government has learned from other creative industries, industry clusters in which governments are taking an interest. These include Silicon Alley in New York, which promotes itself as a location dedicated to the growth and evolution of the internet industry. Some areas of Berlin, Cap Digital in Paris, which is one of 71 official competitive clusters that the French government supports, and I'm sure you've also heard of 22at in Barcelona in Spain. In the case of 22at and Cap Digital in Paris, these are run by companies that have a service contract with the state to deliver a series of performance-related metrics in relation to driving economic development. In the case of others, the relationship with government is less formal, but they are all part of effective networks. In the case of London's Tech City, it's in a low-cost part of east of London, right next door to the city, which is massively expensive. It's been forming for 17 years. There were no formal stakeholder engagement other than supply and demand for low-cost property, and its attraction as a hip place to locate a business. It's not planned, but a number of private landlords took in artists as tenants, and with the convergence of technology built by social media, the area began to see a combination of technology and media companies joining the artists. And these private landlords started to create co-working space for sole traders, people working on their own, and small businesses in the digital sector. And in fact, these landlords pioneered a space offering for a membership fee to allow access on a daily basis into converted warehouses. They put in support facilities, such as high-speed broadband, of course, networking notice boards, so you can tell people what office services you could offer, Skype studios and meeting rooms, among others. And in November 2010, the government decided to capture the competitive advantage that the area offered to business, to the businesses that were there, and build on this with policy support. And it's now been rebranded with UK government help. Much closer interest has been developed in the site by the public sector. And the strategy has been to support micro and SMEs in the area, promote international investment into the area. So we have a team of people from the UK Trade and Investment Group who work internationally to bring companies there. And its expansion is, they're trying to get it to expand into the surrounding area, right next door to the 2012 Olympics. There's an area where they're trying to encourage businesses to grow and move. And they put an agency in place to deliver these programs. And since the engagement of the UK government in the area, there has been an increase in the number of companies. Today it stands at 3,200, and they employ about 48,000 people. By raising the profile of companies in the area and promoting their high level of innovation, a number of other international companies have moved to the site, and a number of angel clubs have focused on the area and are actively engaged in trying to identify companies in which to invest. The Mayor of London, as part of his policy, has created a $33 million investment fund. And in fact, the paper that's published lists some of the key investments. We've seen Twitter and Yahoo, for example, who've invested more than 65 million in buying two of our companies, as well as seed fund and venture capital investments that have exceeded $50 million US dollars. So it's a substantial level of activity, economic activity. Tech City, like other innovation clusters in cities, has developed strong working relationships with local universities. In the case of Tech City, these are with some of the world's leading academic institutions, such as UCL and Imperial College, University College London, that's UCL. And in the case of City University, which just by chance has a campus next door, they have now set up a pop-up university branded Unruly University, which offers a range of free courses to the sector once a week in a meeting over a pub. And if you look on the website for Unruly University, you can see it's a really fascinating range of courses run by entrepreneurial professors. It's impressive and interesting. And this close interest is an advantage, and it enables host universities to specialise and build on their competence. Also, at a lower level, the agency is building a technical base by organising new apprenticeship schemes with the local further education college, which is called Hackney College, which is the location of the borough where the Tech City is based. And that's to produce technicians that can support the industrial base. The rise in influence of the individual over the state, access to information, and an increasing market size for ideas, all of which come from connectivity, has shifted the balance of power from the state to individuals to a degree. This has spurred on the growth of the creative industries, and in parallel the creative industry sector is ideally suited to the city environment. This opportunity continues to be part of an experiment in economic development because of the need to adapt to meeting some of the challenges of growing urbanisation. Well, I'm not sure if my paper has any deep insights, but I hope that the observations have been at least of interest. Thank you.
He asked for 25 minutes, but we did it in 22 minutes. Okay, but we agree. Please stay here. Then you pose the question right now, because otherwise we will get into trouble with time schedule. So he's willing to answer any question. Are there questions? Yes.
I was sort of fascinated by the remark that the report called Innovation a Non-Linear Process. I'd like to understand why they call it a non-linear process. I can understand it's a non-monotonic process. I understand it's not a straight line process, but it would be nice to know why you call it a non-linear process.
Well, I assume that it's based on the fact that they concluded that you don't jump from one element to another, because in building a company, which is the process of innovation, building a company from a new idea, you're going to have to address different issues, market, building a team, taking the technology from an idea right through all the proofs, right up to a warrantable product. And you can jump around in that process, and you may find that you get to the point where you think you've achieved the right business model, but then you discover actually the business model doesn't work because the customer doesn't exist, and you've got it wrong, so you have to go back. And in going back, it's not linear because you're restarting. There's a feedback loop in the process. So if there's a feedback loop, I guess it's not linear, but I'm not a mathematician.
Further question? Yes. Second.
So thank you, Malcolm. If I did not understand it wrongly, it seems that, especially in the case of tech cities London, UK, that it started from private, especially small and medium-sized companies. They took the advantage of low price. And then second is the government rebranding of this area. And third is the introduction of international companies. And the last is the universities. So this is very different from our common so-called linear R&D model. Do you suggest that in this case, or how will you propose in this case, government or university can take any role as a leader?
What it has done is that the government has recognised that this self-generated concept needs some financial support to try and accelerate the growth of the size of the companies. So it is made available through its programs, which is only released recently, the opportunity to bid to the government for what we call the SBRI, Small Business Research Initiative, where you can make a pitch to government, and if it's competitive, they'll fund it. So there's one element of funding. There's also a network that's been created, which allows people to use, and I don't understand ICT, but there's an open source bit of software which is available now through the government that you can use to develop your ideas associated with a particular application. So that's another element. So there is actually technical support coming in to add to the entrepreneurial spirit, because I think that the location has shown that there are entrepreneurs that exist in the creative industries. And it's interesting that years ago, when I left university, you needed £1 million to buy a computer. Today you can buy one very cheaply. But when you left art college, you needed a pencil and a bit of paper to make a living. But in a way that they've converged, you can both make a living now with technology. And so what has happened is that there's an important merging of entrepreneurial artists, which there had to be years ago, and they've retained that thrust. They're individuals, they have a view, they don't like coercion, and you can then add to that technology and you can really build something up.
Okay, so there's one question and the last one. Yes, please.
Thank you. I am interested in your remarks regarding that geography still matters. I would like to know, what do you think is an important criteria to choose a location as the location of a cluster of innovation? Is it more in the topographical or geological criteria, or is it more in the demographical, or obviously the agglomeration of infrastructures? Thank you.
Well, particularly with the creative industry, I think it is, I guess, to do with cost, and I don't know whether that falls into demographic or topographic, because I'm not a geographer. But I would say that the thing that appears to have driven the creation of the clusters around the world is the pricing of the space. So you can actually influence that. Happened in Tech City, I think. I've not been to Silicon Alley in New York, but I believe the same. And from what I've understood from Professor Becker, the area of Berlin, which I think is called Berlin Bitter, is a low-cost area. So I think cost is important, but you have to have the skills base, and it has to be an area of interest. You couldn't do it in the far reaches of Wales. It has to be the location where people aggregate, especially from the creative industries, because they see the opportunity. They can link with advertising agencies, they can link with customers for their services, with the broadcasting organizations. So you need some existing market for these people as well.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Actually,
Use the mic because the other people.
Thank you very much. Actually, I was fascinated by your examples because let me push my question again to developing country model. There is no city in all developing countries that do not have these kind of clusters where you go to get cheap things and modern things that they, fake things sometimes and so on and so forth. But how is the process of forming the board in the UK to develop these two or three examples? Was there a mentor, or did it just evolve spontaneously? Was there a leader to say, look, we need to look at this as an innovation cluster, and then you move in all these different support ideas?
Well, the way it started in the creative cluster in Tech City is that it was self-formed. And the government realised, looking at statistics, and you need data to make a decision in government, you can't just make it on the basis of sticking your finger in the wind. There were statistics returned about number of company formations, VAT returns, that's a tax return, and on the basis of that they started to understand there was something happening and thought, well, this is interesting, can we support it? They realised the basis of the activity, and then they thought, well, perhaps companies like Google and others might be interested in coming here, so they actually sent out people to go to these companies abroad through UKTI, so we have an arrangement for doing that. Now, I believe that you have, from Nigeria, embassies in these countries. You have cities. I think the density of Lagos is 6,500 people per square kilometre. London's only 4,000 people. So there's a difference. So there must be people in that community who understand advertising, can draw, can do the things that are going to advertise Nigerian products. If you can get that kernel of activity going, you can add to the momentum and you can do something about it, because you can apply broadband in cities. If you can build roads and sewers, you can put it in broadband. So there is an opportunity, and I think it's an important direction that can be applied in these countries.
Okay, thank you, Speaker.